What's up, fellow music nerds? Matrix here, and you are locked into the Matrix Music Review Podcast, the only place to get your alternative music fix. And this is a pretty fun episode for me this week, guys. This is going to be our mid-year in review, we'll call it. It's going to be a look back at some of the big albums that have came out this year, and really just kind of what's hovering around my top 5, my top 10. We'll do the same thing with singles, although that'll be probably a rapid fire session at the end, but that is really going to be the basis of this episode. So I hope you guys enjoy this. This is something special that we're going to do at the end of the year, and we'll do a lot bigger breakdown at the end of the year in terms of top 20 albums, top singles, things like that. In the meantime, if you haven't already, head on over to Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok and give us a follow at Matrix Music Review. Head on over to Spotify and like the Control-Alt-Save playlist. That's where you can find all of the music that's been talked about in this episode and all the episodes previously, and stay up to date on what I am listening to, including some other songs on there that I may not review on the podcast. And as always, share this podcast with your friends. Make sure that you are liking it on Apple Music, giving it a 5-star review, giving us a comment, letting us know how we're doing over here at Matrix Music Review so that we can continue to put out this awesome content for you. So the way I am going to work this is I'm going to try to break down the album reviews or the album conversation into different categories for you guys so you can stay with it. And the first category we're going to talk about is the Giants returning category. So we only have 2 in that category this time, and the first one being Paramore. So Paramore's album was probably the first album I reviewed for this podcast. And, you know, it was an album that at the time I really enjoyed. I thought it had a lot of growth on it. I know that it was very mature for them, and it was that, you know, sound that we still knew and love, but it was just a little bit more advanced. And honestly, I have to say that that's an album that I thought was going to continue to get better for me. And over time, I just haven't gone back to it. And I don't know if that is just because of the sheer number of albums that I've got to listen to this year, or if it's just because the quality has just been gradually so much better since we've talked about the Paramore album. You know, it's still an album that I revisit here and there, but it's definitely not one that I see maintaining its spot right now in this top 20 or so. And then the other big giant that released an album this year was Fall Out Boy. And Fall Out Boy almost kind of gives me the complete opposite. You know, I've tried to go back and listen to some of the albums that I wrote down as, you know, favorites when I wanted to do this mid-year tier list, so to speak. I kind of just sat down and wrote some of the albums that I've listened to, and, you know, some of them I knew definitely I didn't revisit, and then some of them I realized that I hadn't re-listened to in a while, so I went back and listened, and Fall Out Boy definitely benefited from a re-listen. You know, the return to form for them has been so strong, and it's definitely one that has just kept coming back, and I've wanted to, you know, keep playing. And, you know, the switch to alternative full time has really kind of given me a chance to revisit some of these albums that I have really enjoyed throughout the year. And Fall Out Boy is definitely one of them. You know, So Much for Stardust really is probably the better of the 2 out of the Fall Out Boy Paramore albums that were released this year. And, you know, I'm excited to see if it continues to gain some steam with me. You know, I know they're on tour this summer, and that's going to help them in terms of popularity with that album. So I wouldn't be surprised to see So Much for Stardust end up on a lot of people's end of the year lists. I think it's got that kind of potential. With the big names out of the way in terms of like the Giants returning to form, the next category I'm going to talk about is the big names that have also put out albums this year that I really enjoyed, or that are still kind of in that top 20 conversation. And so the first one I'm going to talk about real quick is Foo Fighters. You know, you guys know how emotional that album is. You know that it's that classical Foo Fighters sound. It's that classic rock vibe. And, you know, it's another one that just because of how emotional the lyrics are, it's very easy to get connected to an album like that. It's very easy to continue to play an album like that because you feel that raw emotion in the band and in their voice and in their music. So that's one that I've kind of gone back to a few times since it came out and really have enjoyed my time with that album. The next one is Tear Me to Pieces from Story of the Year. Now, this is another one that I went back to and re-listened and kind of forgot how much I enjoyed listening to this album from Story of the Year. I mean, it is just spectacular top to bottom. I mean, Afterglow is one of those songs that really pushes this album over the edge for me. And I find myself having that experience a lot where, you know, an album as a whole may be great, but there may be one or two songs that really just push it into that next level for me. And Afterglow is the song for me that does it on this Tear Me to Pieces album from Story of the Year. It is definitely a song that I see being in a contention for, you know, top tracks, things like that. And it's kind of what keeps Story of the Year teetering on that top 10 range as opposed to, you know, that top 20 range. So that'll be interesting to see where that one ends up falling at the end of the year. And that kind of leads right into the conversation that I have with this next album, which is Intellectual Property from Waterparks. You know, the Waterparks record is a lot of fun. It is definitely one that I've enjoyed listening to multiple times. I think it's got a great stretch of songs in the middle where I think it's Funeral Grey, Brainwashed, and Two Best Friends, which is one of the best stretches on an album that I've heard in a very long time, that they all just flow so well together, and it really just makes that album stand out. And also, like I put out in that episode about the Waterparks album, they really are the kings of the one-liners. You know, if you're looking for some lyricism, Waterparks is where you need to go. This entire album is just filled with little one-line, two-line phrases that really just stand out above the rest and really push this album for me even higher than it probably would be. You know, I think this is one that's going to probably flip-flop with Story of the Year in that, you know, 13 to 9 range when we get to that point. But I should also put a disclaimer out there before I go any further that I'm saying all these numbers and saying, you know, top 20, top 10, things like that. All of these are subject to change. This is not going to be set in stone. This is a mid-year tier list. There is a lot of music yet to come out. There's a lot of time to spend with albums that I've already listened to. And there could be albums that come out of nowhere that really, you know, over time have just developed into something fantastic. So don't take any of these ratings or rankings to heart just yet. Let's wait until the end of the year for that one. But that's kind of my feeling on the Waterparks album. And then the last album in this, you know, big names being released category is Hot Mulligan's album, Why Would I Watch? And this is one that I have not been able to spend enough time with. I know that I've reviewed it a few times. I've reviewed it on the podcast. I've listened to it a few times, but this is one that's definitely going to need a few more re-listens. You know, I think that's probably coming up very shortly. I know that the song Christ Alive, My Toe, Damn It Hurts has been just running up my most played songs for some reason. I don't know what it is about that song that really just has clicked with me for some reason, but it's definitely one that's kind of become a favorite of mine. And, you know, the Hot Mulligan album was a fun listen. I know that, you know, when I first listened to it, those yelping vocals were something that I wasn't really sure about, but they really have grown on me even more than when I reviewed the album. The next small category is just an EP category. You know, I find it really hard to sometimes include EPs on albums, tier lists, or things like that. But I've had two this year that have really stood out above the rest for me and have really been they've been in some of my top played, so I can't not talk about them. The first one being Sleepless and their album and their EP, Bring Back Movie Quote Song Titles. I think I'm going to always have this special connection to Sleepless because of them being on my first podcast. They were the first band that I really discovered on my own, and nobody else really knew who they were when I was telling people about them. And those are things that really make this podcast enjoyable for me, is being able to discover new artists, share their music out there with everybody, and also see the appreciation that these artists have for people really being interested in their music. And this EP is spectacular. It has been so much fun to go back to Surrender and go back to Friends Like Us and just think back to my first listen of that and think back to, when I talked about Friends Like Us, they really are the friends that you want. They're not the friends that they say they are in the song that you don't want friends like them. They really are. Those are the friends that are going to be there for you forever and for always. And it was just such a great discovery at the time. Now, the second EP that falls in this category is If We Go Down by First and Forever. This EP has been a nonstop love affair with me in it so far, because every song on here has just been so great to listen to. Rivers has particularly been a pretty special song for me. And, it's funny, I always try to put different songs on TikToks, different songs on Instagram Reels. And the one that people gravitated to the most was If We Go Down by First and Forever. I have a friend that I sourced it out to and was like, hey, which one would really, draw you in more? And they picked If We Go Down over a bunch of other really spectacular songs that you're going to hear about in the single track list. And I think that just kind of shows the commercial appeal that First and Forever has as well, and how much fun people are going to have with this EP as they continue to discover it. The next section of albums, or the next tier, if you will, is going to be the discovery category that are right on the edge. They are debut albums that have really stood out to me this year. And then there's one at the end that I have to talk about, and I've never talked about it on the podcast, but I got to talk about it now because for some reason I keep going back to this damn album and I really can't figure out why. So the first album in this category is Sam Hauge, and you guys know that I'm a big fan of Sam's, and what really stands out about his Out of Isolation album is the fact that he did everything himself. Lyrics, production, instrumentation, all of it is Sam. That is so impressive to me. That is really just something that continues to put his stuff above the rest in terms of these new discoveries. And, his album is one that I've revisited many times this year. This is one that is definitely right now inside that top 10 or very close to it if it's not already. So I'm excited to continue to see where I go with this one. The next album is Secret Combinations from Bridge the Gap. This is the best skate punk record I've heard in a very long time. And I just talked about this on the last podcast, this little resurgence that I'm seeing in skate punk, whether it's by design or whether it's just me and my personal taste. But Bridge the Gap really has kind of taken over as my favorite artist in that little subgenre, right? There's so many different little subgenres of the punk scene, of the alternative scene, however you want to classify it. And the fact that we're getting such great skate punk music right now is just so great to hear. In particular on this album, My Creation is one of my favorites, but Whippersnapper is very, very close. Those two are like 1-2, really hard to discern. It depends on what day it is, how I'm feeling, what song I'm going to play more from them. So Bridge the Gap, man, really has stepped up for me this year. The next debut is Archetypes Collide, self-titled debut. Another one that, it's hard to think that this was a band that I wasn't aware of, 6 months ago, when they've become such a huge favorite that quick. And, sometimes you may have a little bit of trouble discerning what is good critically and what is just a favorite of yours, but that's not the case here with Archetypes Collide. Kyle's voice is so different and so unique that Archetypes Collide is going to be very recognizable very quickly. I think them going on the tour that they were just on is going to do wonders for them. I know they opened up for Trivium, and I think it was Beartooth. I don't want to be misquoted there, but I think it is Beartooth that they opened up for. And man, I gotta wonder how well that show was and how well done it was, because those are three heavy hitting bands. And in terms of songs off that album, Love Again has really stood out. Destiny has stood out, and I know that's getting play on Octane, which is huge for them. And it's just one that has just been so much fun to listen to and get acquainted with. So I'm hoping that everybody else feels the same about this Archetypes Collide record. It has been a spectacular find for me. And it's too early to call on these last two because it's just been very recent, but I have a very strong feeling that Old Neon and their most recent album, Can't Effing Wait, is going to be one that stands out, and as well as Suburban Dictionary from Friend Circle. These are albums that I just reviewed and just talked about on the podcast, but Suburban Dictionary has been, I'm going to say it, it's been a masterpiece for me. It has been spectacular, and Old Neons is pretty close there too. So those are two that I would say I'm definitely going to have to keep an eye on in terms of where they're going to fall, because right now it's pretty safe to say that they're going to be included, but they need some more time to kind of fester and get through before I can say anything else about them. And the last album in this category is one that I really have never talked about on the podcast. It's one that I really don't know why I keep going back to it. There's just something that keeps drawing me in, and it is the album from 100 gecs. I have no words to explain it. It's a fun, different album that really, it makes no sense. It fits into the genres that we talk about, but it doesn't really, you guys can tell I'm lost for words here. I don't really know what to say about it, but I keep going back to it and I keep playing it. So I can't say that it's not going to be in a top 10, a top 20. It just keeps coming back, and it's a lot of fun to listen to. So I wanted to at least mention it to you guys. I never have given it a full review on the podcast, but at this point, I gotta be honest, it's looking like it's gonna be around. So I want to know what your thoughts are on that album, if you've heard it yet or not. Let me know what you think in the comments. All right, and the next category is a group of albums that I would say are gonna fall just outside of my top 5 right now. They are interchangeable with some of the ones in the top 5. They're interchangeable sometimes with each other. There's no specific order to these right here. So the first one that falls just outside is Nothing Worse Than Too Late from Real Friends. When it came out, I talked about it as a potential album of the year contender, and I don't think much has changed for me on that. I re-listened to it again this past week just for fun, and it really holds up. Tell Me That You're Sorry is one of my favorite songs of the year. It really just captures everything I want in that pop punk genre, and, I couldn't be happier with this. The second album is Truth Decay from You Me at 6. And this is another one, man, that this was from the first podcast, and it's just continued to gain steam with me. Mixed Emotions has been my favorite off of there by far, but I've re-listened to that recently as well, and it's just such a fun album to have, and it's such a classic album to have. I don't think it falls into the metalcore. I don't think it falls into a pop punk scene. I think it's just kind of a straight down the middle rock and roll album that I've kind of been waiting for and wanting. And so I'm really happy with Truth Decay. Freak of Nature from Heart Attack Man is just outside that top 5, and that's one that, again, is gaining a lot of steam with me for some reason. I am continuing to play Like a Kennedy, continuing to play C4. Those are the top ones for me off of there. It's just a very fun punk record, and it's really enjoyable if you haven't heard it. And then the last one is a grouping, and I grouped them together on a podcast when I've been talking about them, but it's the new ones from Misfortune, Gravity's Rainbow, and Pyrophonics from Heavenward. Those two albums are extremely good, and it kind of is the situation where I feel like once I include one, the other one's kind of gotta, I don't know if I'm going to be able to include both, or if I'm going to feel like I can include both, but right now, man, they are neck and neck with, that top spot in there. They both have a lot of similarities. Lyricism is great on both of these albums. I think I might like the instrumentation on Misfortune a little better, but then I also like the stylistic sounds of the vocals on Heavenwards a little bit better. So really hard to pit those two albums together, but so strong from both of them, and I know that Heavenward's was a debut, so that kind of makes it a little bit better, or a little bit easier to root for in my eyes, I guess. But two really strong albums there from those two bands. And lastly, I'm going to talk about this category. This is my current top 5. They are in no particular order, so don't say, oh, well, Matrix put Sleep Token at his top 1. Clearly that's going to be his favorite for the year. No, it's just the first one that I talked about. So first one I'm talking about is Sleep Token, Take Me Back to Eden. Religious experience again is what I'm going to say. It is... It's one that I continue to play, but again, Sleep Token's album is one that I feel like you have to play from start to finish, and you can't really say, oh, I'm going to play Euclid, and then that's going to be it, or oh, I'm going to play Are You Really Okay, and then call it a day. I feel like this album really works best when it's listened to in its entirety from start to finish, so that's the only thing that could hold that Sleep Token album back from being in the top spot. But overall, I loved that album. It's so great. And the next album I'm going to talk about is Built to Last from Arrows in Action. You guys know that my love for Arrows in Action has just grown over the year. I've seen them in concert. I've seen them just kind of grow into this band that I'm waiting for them to explode. And I think with this tour across the US this summer, I think it's bound to happen, especially as more and more people discover Arrows. And a little story right here real quick. My girlfriend went on a trip recently with a bunch of friends, and they were catching up and talking about the podcast or whatever, and one of the people asked, who was I really listening to, who was some bands that I was really high on. And one of the bands that she brought up was Arrows, and the other friend was like, oh my god, I love them, like I just found this new album, it's so great. And that was so cool to hear. Sometimes I feel like even in this alternative scene, bands like Arrows in Action, bands like Magnolia Park that I consider to be very much household names are not in the mainstream area. But to hear somebody else know and really appreciate that band was so great. And Built to Last, man, that album has been a classic for me. It's definitely one that I don't see moving from this top 5, just a matter of where it lands. Learn My Lesson is my favorite off that album by far. And, lyricism and music is all that I needed from that song. And that's where I feel like that album shines the most. So love that one. Next album is Past, Present, Future from Meet Me at the Altar. Another band that really benefited from me seeing them live. I think re-listening to that record after seeing it live just kind of put it more into perspective for me that this is a strong band. This is a band that's about to erupt, especially with getting ready to open for 5 Seconds of Summer at Madison Square Garden. I'm really excited for that. I think it's another band that's just going to continue to gain steam. I think Cool is a great track off of there. TMI is a banger. Personal favorite is A Few Tomorrows, which is a little bit slower, but the emotion behind it when you listen to it and look at the lyrics is just so well done from that band that, this is such a strong entry into our album tier list that I can't really ignore it. Fourth album is the new one from Honey Revenge, Retrovision. And man, I've only had a few weeks with it, but I'd said it in the review. This is one that's it's spectacular. Top to bottom, it's great. I didn't skip any tracks on there. Every time I flip it on, it doesn't really matter what track it is. I love it. And it's just one that's going to continue to get better and better for me as the year continues to grow. And now for my surprise album, which kind of falls in this last space in my top 5. And it's one that at the beginning of the year, or even when I listened to it, be honest, I probably would have told you guys it wasn't going to fall in my top 5 for sure. And wasn't really sure if it was going to fall in the top, 10, 20 or whatever. But the fifth album that I have really been playing nonstop is Thanks But No Thanks from Can't Swim. This is an album that really just keeps rising. I don't know what it is. I don't have an answer. It talks about a lot of heavy subject material. The vocals on it are great, but it's a little bit different. It's more of a muted sound. It's not really those big bellowing vocals that you hear on some of these other albums, especially in the ones in this top 5. It doesn't sound as produced, but this Can't Swim record is fantastic. I find myself, throughout the week saying, trying to think about what I want to listen to at work today. You know what? I'm going to throw on Thanks But No Thanks from Can't Swim. I really want to listen to that today. That's happened a lot of times this year so far, and it's crazy to me because that is not an album that I would have expected to do that, but man, here we are. Here we are with Can't Swim's new album and it being this high on my list, and that's so much fun to me. That's exactly why I do this. That's exactly why I re-listen to things, and hopefully you guys do the same, and hopefully you guys are enjoying that record too. So, look, that wraps it up for our albums. Like I said at the beginning, things are bound to change, and, the top 5 may not be the top 5 at the end of the year, and hell, the top 20 probably won't even be the same, but we'll get to that later in the year, and we'll do some other fun stuff with that. Now, I just want to mention some of these singles that I've really been listening to a lot this year. Might be in the top 20 songs. These are no order, no nothing. This is just going to be a rapid fire me talking about some of these tracks real quick. So the first artist I'm going to talk about, because it's 2 tracks from him, is Nick Karcher. Mr. Obsessive is probably going to be the one that ends up at the highest point of the list, but Second Chance isn't far behind. This is an artist that I found at the beginning of the year with Mr. Obsessive and have really been stoked to continue to follow the trajectory here and just continue to get great stuff. So that's one of the top ones for me. Sunny Smile from Mouth Culture is another one that just continues to rise up my board. Love the sound of it. Love the chorus on that. Crooked Teeth, any of their tracks that they've released this year have been spectacular, but the one I'm gravitating towards the most is Drink Bleach. It probably could have been included in the EP category, but I just wanted to keep it to 2. But Plastic off the Girlfriend's new EP is spectacular. That's been a top track for me this year. Sleep Theory and their song Another Way, particularly the reimagined, more acoustic version, is one that I've gravitated towards a lot and I'm really impressed with. The Funeral Portrait's Alien is another one that I've really connected to a lot. Same thing with The Plot and You and Left Behind. 2 tracks from my very first podcast ever that have just continued to be played over and over again. Love those. You guys know that I'm a big Taylor Acorn fan, and out of all the tracks she's released this year, I gotta say my favorite is Certified Depressant. I think that's the winner for me so far. Makeout had a great one this year with Better Days, and then you have a band like The Haunt, which More and I Know This Won't Go Over Well are both really strong. You have an artist like Walwin, where he's released a bunch of really good stuff this year, but I think my favorite so far is Stop Living and Don't Dream. I mean, I'm going to continue to just list these off at this point because I have a bunch written down. 408, they have a ton of stuff. Again is great, but my favorite song from them is probably We Don't Get High Like We Used to. Holding Absence is making a comeback. I think Crooked Melody for me is my favorite, but all of their new stuff is on the playlist at this point because every time they drop something, it's just as good, if not better, than the last. Knox with his track Love Letter is huge for me. Bring Me the Horizon's new one, Lost, is another top tier track. I think that's going to be one that you guys see commercially get a lot of success and a lot of love at the end of the year. No Deal and their track Let Go, that was a great discovery. Really happy that I found those guys. That track's been playing a lot. Sophie Powers and her song Bathroom Floor, so angsty, and I just love the sound on that track. I love it so much. Loveless and their new one, I Hope I'm Not Sick. And then, I have a couple of discoveries here. I have Mitch Rip with his track Yellow. That's been a huge track for me so far since I found it. In Balance, Lost As I am so stoked for their new stuff when it comes out. I think I saw it's like September, when it comes out. I'm so looking forward to hearing their stuff. And then I'm going to give you guys my top 2 tracks so far this year. The first one is Studio Apartment from Marlhy. That track has been just like the perfect blend of pop punk. It's been the perfect blend of production and everything. I mean, it has just been nonstop for me. It's definitely looking like it's going to be in my Spotify Wrapped at the end of the year. But I think my favorite track so far this year is the collab from 408 and Magnolia Park, Manic. When they introduced it as this is the song of the summer, I think, everybody probably was a little skeptical, and I know I was. Everybody says that they have the song of the summer, or they have the next greatest thing, but sometimes it doesn't ever live up to the hype. And honestly, this one did. It lived up to the hype. It has continued to be a top level, top tier track for me. I think there's no doubt in my mind that it's my favorite collaboration of the year by far. And there's been some good ones, but I think this is easily my favorite track so far this year. It's got a lot of good competition with, Marlhy and Nick Karcher and people like that. But, having two heavyweights in this alternative scene in Magnolia Park and 408 together, it's not something we see very often, and their styles blend so well together. So Manic, my top song of the year so far. There's a lot of great songs with it that you can catch on the podcast, and you'll see that there. I think that wraps it up for our mid-year tier list. I hope you guys like this. It's a little bit of a rapid fire format. It's a little bit different than what you guys are used to, but I had a bunch of fun doing it. I had a bunch of fun going back and listening to some albums. I had a lot of fun looking at, my singles and figuring out what it was that I really enjoyed so far this year. Was there anything that, I was really high on that fell off? Usually it was more of there was something that I wasn't super high on that I ended up liking a lot more. So this was fun. I'm looking forward to doing this at the end of the year and doing some other fun and creative stuff with it so that you guys can get an idea of, really what's going on in my head in terms of top albums, top songs, and, maybe we'll do some, creative awards or something like that. Maybe we'll do that at the end of the year as well. So I hope you all enjoyed this episode. As always, head on over to Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok and give us a follow at Matrix Music Review. Like the Control-Alt-Save playlist over on Spotify. Wherever you get your podcast, whether it's Apple Music, Spotify, Google, Amazon, wherever you're listening to us, keep listening to us. Make sure you're sharing it with a bunch of your friends, showing them the podcast, showing them the Instagram page, having them follow us. Leave us a comment. Let us know what your favorite album of the year is so far, or if you have a new track that you've been listening to nonstop that you think is your favorite so far. Leave that in the comments below so that we can see what you're listening to as well. And leave us a 5-star review, thumbs up, whatever you may need to do. And, as always, my Spotify listeners, you guys get somebody that plays you out every week. This week is no different. We're going to give it to our top single of the year with 408 and Mag Park, Manic.